All right, guys, so let us introduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Tamazur. I'm a medical doctor and a health psychologist. And after studying psychology from US, I came to Pakistan to open a clinic called the Calm Planet, and it's located in Karachi, Pakistan. How about you, Shumoel?
So I am currently a student in mental health counseling, as well as I have been practicing neurofeedback therapy for the past year.
Welcome to the Mindful over Mindless series, and today our topic of discussion is...
We're going to be talking about individualistic societies and collectivistic societies and the mental health of individuals in both of these.
Yeah, this topic is really close to my heart, considering my own background as I'm an immigrant in US, as I've been an immigrant in US, and now I'm running the Calm Planet in Karachi in Pakistan. So if anyone wants to book an appointment with me, they can see the link below and book an appointment with me. So Shumoel here is a first-generation immigrant, and first-generation immigrants' mental health is really close to my heart as well, because I've done a lot of work on that, and how we have studied in a lot of researches that first generation immigrants do suffer in their mental health because of a lot of variables, and obviously we're going to talk about those variables. However, first I want to discuss that what are the different societies, the individualistic society and the collectivistic societies, and what's the definition of it. So Shumoel, would you be kind enough to highlight the definition of individualistic society and collectivistic society?
Of course. So individualistic societies are one that really value the self. They have an importance on personal choice, growing as an individual, becoming independent, autonomy. They have a huge emphasis on growing as one's own being. Versus a collectivistic society, which has a huge emphasis and values on the group. So they have a huge importance with family relations, social relations, and personal growth is defined within the group. So that is sort of what their importance is, and they grow as a group, and they think of personal growth as a whole, whereas an individualistic society views personal growth as individual.
Yeah, so soon you'll have Shumoel as a counselor. Okay, so Shumoel, since we have, shed light about the definition, I want to talk about my perspective a little bit. When I moved from Pakistan to US, what I felt as an individual in terms of cultural differences and all, and I came to Connecticut, and in the suburbs of Connecticut. So obviously there are not many immigrants over there. There weren't many immigrants over there, though in the university I was exposed to a lot of diversity, but at that particular time, first 2 semesters were really hard, and I did felt very, very lonely. Now in US, we see with individualistic society that getting out of your parents' house is considered very important. Is one of the most important steps of your life. What do you have to say about that?
So I think definitely that is an area of growth. So it's considered growth is when kids are able to move out of their parents' house, get their job, and be able to financially support themselves. I think that is, in an individualistic society, that is a huge step for growth.
Yeah, okay, so I really want to talk about the fact that how people, especially our Desi people, people are in our Desi communities, kind of throw shade at Desi culture. And I get that there are toxic traits in our Desi culture. But every culture has toxic traits. It's not like that Desi culture is toxic culture, but that's what's been happening. I'm seeing all over on Instagram that, Desi people are kind of like looking down upon our Desi culture, and they say that it's completely toxic. It's a completely toxic culture and all. But I really want to talk about it from different perspective, because I can see the toxic traits. But what I think that even individualistic culture has some toxic traits. So what's your perspective on that?
So I definitely think it's easier to say, oh, this is toxic or this is bad, just because you highlight the bad aspects of that. And I think one major thing is that I feel like from a collectivistic society, they have had a lot of exposure to individualistic societies through movies, TV shows. The American culture is very common and it's very known. It's very known. And whereas that's not the case vice versa. Like people from an individualistic society aren't able to understand the collectivistic views. They think that they don't have the choices or the freedom, when that's not necessarily the case. And I think that a huge important thing is that every culture can have its toxic traits, but you can't say the whole culture in itself is toxic. So I think that that's where that issue lies in, is that we have so much exposure to individualistic societies, but a lot of times the cons of this society aren't highlighted. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, but if you only see the good side of it, of course that's going to seem appealing. And so I think it's important for us to highlight the good and the bad of both different cultures and societies.
100%. I completely agree with you. And this is really interesting for me because when I came to US, a lot of my friends who were also in their mid to late 20s, they were under such pressure that they had to move out of their parents' house. And we, on the other hand, being a Pakistani, I was like, what? Really? Why do you have to move out of your parents' house? But it's such an important aspect of their life. I mean, like it's a part of their growth. They consider themselves as failures if they do not move out of their parents' house. And in comparison, us, it's completely the opposite. Actually, if we move out of our parents' house, it's not considered a really great thing. It's like considered that we don't even respect our parents. We just keep on living and living and living with our parents. I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions. There are exceptions to the rule, but I'm talking about the majority. Why don't you talk about your experience about moving out? And I mean, like, I can see it from a different perspective, and I would like to discuss that with you.
So I'm a first generation immigrant, and I was born in the US in Connecticut, and my parents are from a collectivistic society. And so I grew up with the views of the collectivistic society in my household, but I was growing up in an individualistic society in a completely American environment. And so I feel like I have had exposure to both societies and have taken values from both of them as well. And I personally did move out of my parents' house, and I know that it was a huge struggle and issue for them. So they were always, and when I talk to my American friends about it, it's not something that they can relate to. It's not that they don't care, but my parents will call me and ask me, did I eat? Am I feeling okay? How's my health? They'll just call me constantly, asking what I'm up to all the time. And to others, I feel like it might seem controlling, but they're just concerned because it's something that wasn't normal for them, for their child to move out. It's something that they don't understand. They're trying to get an idea of it and understand it, but they just don't understand it. Whereas my American friends, they would get calls from their parents. Of course they would. Their parents asked them about their life as well, but it was just so different the way the conversations went. And it was like a constant, like, okay, why don't you just move home already? Like, just a constant issue as to why I had to move out. Like, they just didn't understand. And when I would be like, oh, like, I'm working on my own, I'm doing, like, I'm taking care of myself, I'm like doing this for myself, by myself, and they're just like, why? Like, they just don't understand as to why I have to do that when they're here and they're alive to do that to take care of me for me.
Yeah, actually, that's so on Instagram I see that even Desi people say that about Desi culture, that it's suffocating, and then we are too involved and we are too intrusive in our kids' life. But the thing is that I do think that both the cultures draw their values from completely different places. In an individualistic society, it's so important for kids to move out and live alone because they see that as an important part of their growth. They see that the child is not growing. I mean, like, not the child, but the person is not growing until they have moved out. So they need to have that experience, because in individualistic society, they believe that living alone is an experience that a kid needs.
Independence.
And and a person needs, they need to be independent. They need to learn to pay their bills. They need to learn to make their life. And parents are really disappointed in them. They are unable to do that. However, if we talk about a Desi society or Desi culture, and especially Pakistani culture, we derive our values from a completely different place. We do not believe that living alone is an important aspect of growing. We don't think that people evolve because of living alone. We actually see that we believe in assimilation. We believe in getting along, and if you're unable to get along with your parents, with your siblings, then that is seen as a failure. So actually it's completely opposite. It's so interesting that one society values living alone and being independent, and another society, us, we value living together. We value getting along. And interestingly, we even live together sometimes when we get married, especially guys, like men, I'm sorry, especially men, they keep on living with their parents and they kind of bring their wives into the household. In India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, these are really common things. And interestingly, it's even expected for the girl who comes into the family, it's expected for her to get along with the boy's parents as well. And I know that not every family is healthy, and not every family's dynamic is healthy. This could become into a toxic thing. I realize that, but interestingly, this wasn't supposed to be toxic. Like, this wasn't made in a way that it wasn't made to suffocate people. It was actually made for people to grow, because in our culture we kind of value getting along. And at the end of the day, Shumoel, we are social animals. Don't we live together and make a civilization together? If you go to cavemen and cavewomen as well, we used to live together and make a civilization together. So we are social animals, and we kind of we need to value getting along. So it's just that two societies are valuing different things. I don't see that as a toxic trait, which usually the Instagrammers are usually they're like, oh my god, this is so toxic, he's expecting me to get along with his parents. But we kind of value that. And also we looked down upon, or we frown upon, living alone, because loneliness is something that we kind of, what should I say? But living alone is not something that we consider important, and rather we consider it somewhat, we pity the people who live alone. We literally pity them. So if someone is living alone, we would say, oh my god, that poor child doesn't have a family. Oh my god, that poor child probably couldn't get a spouse, or that poor child, oh my god, their family, his family or her family is not concerned about them. Oh Jesus, what kind of a family? Interestingly, there was this German research I was reading, and the Germans had a really nice perspective on US society, and they said that Americans are kind of making people corporate slaves, and also making them lonely. And so I was like, oh my god, it's not only us, collectivistic society, who thinks that people in US are lonely, but even Germans think that. So what do you have to say about that?
So I definitely want to highlight the importance of what you said, that each culture draws its growth from different points. So each culture has its own points of growth, and that's what they consider important for development. And so in terms of the loneliness, I definitely think that is a huge disadvantage of an individualistic society, is that although you may want to say that, oh, it's so toxic that you have your mother-in-law living with you and your father-in-law living with you, but you also have to realize that in those moments you're not alone. Someone's always going to be home to help with anything, essentially. And yeah, they may have some expectations and they may have some requirements, but then at the same time, in an individualistic society, there is a higher rate of loneliness, and there are people tend to feel more alone, and they tend to be more alone. And I think one thing that's easily said is, okay, someone from a collectivistic society could be like, okay, then I don't want that. I'd rather be alone than have the toxicity around me. But it's not so easy to change, and it's not so easy for you to just decide that and change the way you want. When you're living in that society. And same goes for an individualistic society. If someone feels alone, they can't just change the way they want and move home, because that's not an acceptable thing. It's not. So in both situations and in both societies, the disadvantage of it, you can't just up and change it. Does that kind of make sense? You can't just decide, oh, this isn't working for me, so I'm going to up and change it. And so I think that that's really important. Then, okay, in an individualistic society, there is a lot of loneliness, and the people tend to have they tend to be more only have themselves to rely on for most problems. So I definitely think there's a lot of advantages to it. I think that one big value that they highlight is the fact that at the end of the day, you are by yourself and like you don't always have people around. And so they kind of really teach you how to be with yourself, be alone, be okay with being alone, being there for yourself. I think that those can be important traits to have. Those can be important traits to have and be okay with. But at the same time, I don't think that it's necessarily bad if you aren't like that. I think that a lot of times people don't want to be alone, or they aren't necessarily independent or can be alone, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that that's where a lot of issues come from, is that people in individualistic societies think that the collectivistic values are wrong and they're bad, or they don't make sense and they don't give you choice and freedom, but that's not true. I think that it's perfectly okay to be okay with not wanting to be alone. Like you shouldn't have to, and and if that's a culture you belong from, then you can embrace that part of that culture. And so I think that that's really important for us to highlight that can occur. And so I also kind of want to go into the mental health aspect of it. So from your experience of being here, how do you feel it took a toll on your mental health or on other immigrants' mental health from moving from a collectivistic society to an individualistic society?
So yeah, Shumoel, immigrants do face a decline in mental health when they migrate, and I certainly did. I know I did, because a huge component of mental health is social support, and you kind of leave all of your social support back in the home country. Even if you're traveling with family, you leave a lot of your friends here and then move. So obviously, immigrants' mental health suffers, and this is not something that I'm saying. There's a lot of research to prove that this happens. But interestingly, it's the immigrants adapt, but the first generation immigrants are the ones who suffer more. And that's really interesting, but also, something with that amount of research gives us ways to cope and gives us ways to understand more deeply that where those issues are coming from when we talk about the mental health of first generation immigrants. So through research, it is seen that immigrants, they do face a decline in the mental health when they migrate. However, they adapt. The second generation immigrants' life satisfaction is equal to the ones of the locals and the natives. However, the first generation immigrants suffers most because they are really confused about their identity and they're really confused about their values. They do not know if they're supposed to draw their values from the individualistic society or the collectivistic society. And I think I know it through research and through the people I know. However, I do think that you could tell us your perspective.
So definitely, I mean, it's really hard because you're growing up and you're going to school and you're hearing all these different views, and though values aren't something that are always directly said, like it's something that you get indirectly as well. Like I wasn't ever told, oh, this is what you should believe. It's never that direct. You always get these indirect values and indirect beliefs through the society you're in and through your household. So I think it was really difficult growing up because I would go to school and I would see how my peers interacted and see where other people's values were in terms of the society, in terms of the education system, the schooling, and then I would come home and be told something completely different. And so it was really difficult growing up and trying to figure out that, and I think that is one thing that's super, super important in first generation Americans or first generation immigrants, that they aren't able to figure out who they are. So growing up and developing and changing is already a struggle for people to find their identity. And then on top of that, when you add those factors into it, it's like it makes it even more difficult to try to figure out who you are, what you believe, what your values are. And I remember growing up, so Eid is a holiday, it's a religious holiday, and we always celebrate it every year since I was a kid. My parents would have us take the day off from school, we'd go read the morning prayer, we'd celebrate it just like everyone else, I guess, that was also there. We'd celebrate it, and then it just never held that meaning to me, I believe, as it would someone who belongs from there, who belongs from Pakistan, or who grew up there. And I also remember we used to celebrate Christmas. So my mom was someone who believed that, like, whatever place you're in, you could partake in those festivities. But obviously Christmas has a religious meaning behind it for Americans and for Christians. And it was just something that I personally enjoyed so much because of the festivities. We would get like 2 weeks off from school. I loved the lights. I loved the whole tree concept, the gifts and everything. And it was something that I celebrated. And to this one, like in my undergrad, actually, I had a crisis. I was just like, I do not relate to any of these holidays. Like, I cannot truly feel happy about either of them, in all honesty. Like, I enjoy the festivities of Christmas, and I celebrated Eid in Pakistan, and it's a much different experience. I celebrated Ramzan and Eid in Pakistan, but I did not feel an emotional connection to either holiday. And it's like, I just don't have, like, I feel like I don't have a holiday. Like, everyone has a holiday, everyone has something they love, and I love both of them. It's not like I don't like them, I enjoy them, but I don't relate to one. Like, I feel like I relate to Christmas a lot because of the festivities and everything, but I don't have that religious meaning behind it that Americans do. And then same thing with Eid. I enjoy the festivities of it, but I don't have that connection to it. And so it's like, I feel like I've come to terms with it now, but at the time it made me feel really out of place. Like, I remember sitting and being upset about this for like weeks, that I don't belong to either of them. Like, I felt like I don't belong. And I think that is a huge issue that first generation immigrants deal with, is that they don't feel like they belong. And then to add to that, to sort of connect our individualism and collectivism in it, they aren't able to figure out where they belong. They want to obtain some of those individualistic values, and they want to obtain those collectivistic values, but they can't fully belong to either or of them. Like, they have to be able to grasp ideas from each to form their identity, but they aren't able to just be a part of one, because they can't just be fully individualistic. Their parents will, like, I mean, personally, I know, of course, this is like, not, of course, everything we say doesn't apply to 100% of the population, but like the majority of people, I can't fully be individualistic and have those views, because my parents would be like, why haven't you called us in 2 weeks? Like, they would like freak out. They would show up. They would be like, what is going on in your life? What is happening? Like, where are you? Why aren't you home? And then I can't fully be collectivistic because I am still working and living in this. Like, if I want to tell my workplace, oh, I have a family occasion or whatever, like, it's like, okay, so what do we do about that? Like, I still have to make myself fit into this society, but also please my household and my parents, and also fit into the collectivistic society. So I think it makes it really difficult for first generation immigrants, because they can't figure themselves out, and on top of that, trying to fit in either society just makes it so difficult for them. And I know Eid is something that's super valuable to you. Like, how's your perspective?
Like, as a
about
Pakistani American, I would say I was depressed on Eid days. I was really depressed because I felt so sad, because either I had to work, and even if I didn't have to work, like, even if I took a day off, like, what to do with that day off? Like, what? There is no family. I mean, like, I had, some of my family, as you know, in US, but I mean, like, what about the distant family? What about friends? What about these festivities of Eid? So I didn't live in New York, and I think New Yorkers would kind of like disagree with me on that, but I lived in Connecticut, and I lived in the suburbs of Connecticut, right? So there were no festivities, there was no Chandra, there was no Eid, and Eid has such great value for me as because for the major part of my life I had been in Pakistan, and it had such great value for me. And interestingly, Shumoel, I would say that I made some amazing friends in US, amazing friends, and I'm gonna say that, like, I had white friends, I had black friends, and I had Pakistani friends. But the Pakistani friends were the ones who were born in US, so they were born and raised in US, so they were the first generation immigrants. So I made amazing friends with them as well. However, I would say that I could relate more to people who were not natives. I'm not gonna say Native Americans, but I would say that I would relate more to people. how do I put it in a non-controversial way, who are not from our Desi first generation. I would like to relate to people who were third generation or fourth generation immigrants, fifth generation immigrants, rather than the first generation Pakistani immigrants. And that is because they saw themselves as Pakistanis, but honestly, I couldn't see themselves as Pakistani. And I love those people. They're still my friends. However, and they would be really, it would probably be a little offensive to them if I would say that, I don't see you guys as Pakistani. But it is true. Like, they are Pakistani first generation Pakistani immigrants or Indian immigrants. I don't know about Indians per se, but I would say that, at the surface of it, they are like Pakistani, like they are following Pakistani customs, they're following the customs of their particular culture, but deep down they were in Pakistan. They are nothing like my Pakistani friends. So there's this huge difference. So I would say that first generation immigrants, instead of like drawing their identity from either of their culture, they should kind of celebrate their own identity, because I would say they are nothing like the other Americans, like the third, fourth, fifth generation Americans, and they are nothing like Pakistanis or the home country, the people from their home country. So I do think that they should kind of celebrate their own uniqueness and their own identity. And Central just had a first generation immigrant day, and I'm so glad that they did that, because first generation immigrants really need that. As per immigrants are concerned, yes, I did feel depressed, but I was sad about the fact that there are no festivities, and I would say that over the period of those 5 to 6 years, it was the social support that bothered me. And it is, when I'm in Pakistan, it is the social support that kind of gives me the courage and kind of keeps me happy. I think it's the friends and it's the environment, it's in the people in my house. And as because I'm from a collectivistic society, and I have grown up with people in my house, with my siblings in my house. They didn't move out the moment they turned of a certain age and they went to college, so they didn't move out. So I have that enriched in me, and I enjoy that. So I don't like to live alone. Even if I would if I would get married, I would rather want to live with a family instead of just the guy and me and the kid. I would rather want to be with a family. And I don't know, I'm certainly sure that that's not the case with every individual in Pakistan, or every girl in Pakistan, or every guy in Pakistan. But I would say that we do, collectivistic people, we really enjoy each other's company, and we kind of like living with each other. So yes, there are some toxic elements to that. So for example, I definitely want to talk about and highlight how we value getting along with each other. And so we kind of look down upon divorces, and divorce can be an extremely great thing as well if you're in a toxic relationship. So obviously you don't want to be miserable, and that's what's great about an individualistic society, is that they don't judge people on that. They don't judge people on their choices, and they especially do not judge people on their marital choices, on taking a divorce. In US, for example, no one would judge you, but in Pakistan, people would. And in Pakistan, it is frowned upon, and it is kind of postponed, though it's one of the most necessary thing at the moment. For example, if a couple is in a toxic relationship, and the most necessary thing would be for them to take separate ways, but in Pakistan, they would kind of postpone it and delay it and postpone it. And because of the society. But I think instead of seeing that as a toxic thing, we cannot see that particular thing as completely toxic, because we do value getting along with each other. And it's not about the husband and wife only. It's about everything. It's about getting along with your grandparents, getting along with your aunts, getting along with your uncles, getting along with your siblings. However, if in individualistic society, it's completely okay if you're not getting along with your parents or getting along with your siblings. That's completely accepted. So I do think that, since we are evolving in this way, we need to see different perspective. We cannot just say that, our culture is toxic. We have to see that, this thing could turn into a toxic thing, like valuing getting along could turn into a toxic trait, right? So we need to identify that, but we need to also go to the root of it and identify that, at the base of it, it's not toxic. It's the base of it is just a different set of value.
Yeah, definitely. I think that divorce is something, so divorce rates, as we know, are higher in individualistic societies than they are in collectivistic societies. And it can be if growing on or like expanding on the collectivistic view, it could be that they are trying to work on it or trying to make the relationship better. And I feel like one thing that occurs that can also be seen as a toxic thing is the family getting involved. So I feel like that's a huge thing, that the family talks to both parties or the family is involved in it to help keep the relationship strong. And of course, if it cannot be done, then yes, divorce does occur. But it's like you have to understand that is where it comes from, that it comes from a good place. It doesn't come from a bad place. Whereas here, it's like, okay, the husband and wife decided and no one else really gets a say in it. And they don't have that say in it, which once again can be a positive thing, but can also be a negative thing, because at that moment it could be something that's minor that occurred over, and it's like, well, you didn't even get to see that perspective because no one was there to intervene. But once again, I will say, like, at times in collectivistic societies, people make it work, and that can lead to an unhealthy household as well. So it's like that, I do understand that can happen. But once again, you have to realize that the value of where it's coming from in itself is not toxic, just because it turned out to be toxic for a certain household.
So 100%. Shumoel, and I also want to highlight the fact that Pakistani culture, Desi culture is considered toxic because people feel that they have less autonomy, and they have less autonomy because there's a lot of intrusion from their families and also from the distant families like aunts and uncles. For example, people in Pakistan do not understand that marrying or not marrying is a choice, right? They automatically assume that you would want to marry if you're of a certain age, and they would kind of like impose that on you. And then it is annoying when aunts and uncles comes to you, and even like people in distant family or relatives that you've never met, they kind of come to you and ask you questions. And couples, for example, get asked these questions, that why you aren't having a child, what's wrong with you. So these are kind of intrusive questions, but I get the point. That this needs to be stopped. People cannot go on to people and ask questions like, these are personal questions, like, why aren't you married? Like, for example, you don't know what's going on in their life. You don't know what kind of situation they are in. Also, you cannot ask couples that, why aren't they having a child, because you don't know that, how many fertility clinics they are going to. So it can be extremely traumatizing for someone. So obviously you cannot ask these questions, and this needs to be stopped. This needs to be highlighted that this is a toxic trait. But I would want youngsters to see it from a different perspective, because it's people like me, it's people like you who are getting suffocated because of that. So I would want to highlight that perspective. You know how we youngsters, like millennials and Gen Z, we kind of get really annoyed when our relatives are intrusive and they are asking us questions. When are you getting married? When are you having the kid? We feel really suffocated and we get really annoyed. For example, my aunt, she asks me all the time, and she's literally showing me guys and like asking me if I would marry that one or that one. However, here's a perspective. She's coming from a place of love and care, and she really wants me to be happy, and she believes that this is a way of happiness. Now it's her view, right? I don't believe that per se, and I think a lot of people in my generation or your generation do not believe that as well. However, she does, and she is coming from a place of concern and love, and it could be annoying. It is annoying for me as well, but at the same time, if you see it from a different perspective, it's kind it is caring. It is a gesture of care. What do you have to say about that?
I think what's important in terms of that is that we can easily nitpick the bad of each culture. We really could. But it's important as people in a collectivistic society to not idolize one society. And I feel like nowadays it's so idolized, the individualistic society. But once you're really living in it, until you're living in it and until you see the cons of it, it's easy to just say that this is bad in my culture and that's bad in my culture, and the grass always seems greener on the other side, as cliche as that may be, but it does. And so I think the biggest takeaway is that you cannot idolize one culture and one society. You have to realize, and I think it's important to try to understand the roots of your own culture and the roots of your own society. And if someone from a collectivistic society is struggling with that, then try to understand and learn about where those conflicts come from, or what exactly was the purpose of living together. What was the point of it? How did that benefit everyone? And look at the benefits of it. And would it really be all that great if you were living alone or just living with you and your husband and not your in-laws? Like, truly think about it and try to put yourself in that perspective to see.
And don't you think, Shumoel, that if our aunts are intrusive, which they are, 100% they are, okay, and 100% our uncles are also intrusive, but don't you think that at the time of need, they're also the ones who are there, like they come even postpartum. Women can vouch for that when they're in postpartum, aunts are there, they come for the woman. Does that happen in individualistic society? But the aunts and uncles clearly are not intrusive in that society. However, do they also extend the hand of help?
So I think that's really important to highlight, is that when they aren't intrusive, then you cannot expect them to show up at your door. They come when you ask, or I'm sure that there is a medium in which a person invites their family over, but it's never like, oh, my aunt just came and surprised me, or oh, they just came because I was sick. That's not a thing. They don't just show up at your door. And so, yeah, they're not intrusive, but they're also not there at your time of need, or when you feel that you need them. They won't be there. You'd have to ask for that, or you'd have to insist for that. And I think that's a really important thing, is that postpartum, that everyone I know about a Pakistani culture, is that people do show up for the woman after that, but that's not necessarily a thing in an individualistic society, because they believe that the woman should ask when she wants someone to come. So once again, it's a different belief system. It's the different source that she is fine until she's okay. Until then, or her and her husband are just fine, that you don't just show up there with gifts and foods and presents or whatever it is, and like that happens. I feel like food is a big thing that people show up with in collectivistic societies, from what I've seen, that they don't just show up with food in your time of need.
Yeah, true. And to each its own.
Definitely.
To each its own. If you want if you want to be surrounded with those kind of people, then I hope you find that. If you want to be surrounded by if you want to live in an individualistic society and follow those norms, good luck for you. I mean, like, whatever suits you. To each its own. 100%. About first generation immigrants, I remember Isa, your brother, he told me once that my parents do not understand my jokes, and I get that, because the parents and the child are from different culture, and that's why there is there's this gap. So, and interestingly, my sister also said that she doesn't they don't understand, like, my kids do not understand my jokes, like literally they do not. So there's this cultural gap. So how would you highlight that?
So I think that's a really important thing, that parents and children already have an age gap to begin with, which puts a little bit of space between them and makes them have to work a little bit harder to be close to their kids, I feel. And not only is there an age gap here, there's a cultural gap. So you're not just fighting the fact that you're older, you're also trying to fight the fact that your kids do not understand your culture. Or as kids, your parents do not understand it. Like, you'll make a joke and they just will not understand it. Like, it's just, it's so difficult. And then it's hard to be able to relate to your parents, because you feel that they don't understand you, and vice versa. I feel like, especially when it comes to immigrants, that they're already dealing with so much that then at the end of the day, they come home and their kids can't even understand what they're trying to say or what their point is. And many times I remember it just ending in like we try to make a joke, and like my siblings and I would be laughing and our parents would be staring at us like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean by that? And vice
Was
versa.
it
Like, our
tough?
parents.
Would you think was it tough growing up, like being you from a different culture and your parents from a different culture?
I definitely think it was. I think that my parents tried their best for us to be ourselves, and they did try to accept us for how we were, but it was hard because they expected us to just know about certain norms. They expected us to just be like that, and we would question them. We would be like, why? Like, we would question it, and they just wouldn't understand as to why we were questioning the norm, because that is what they grew up with and that was just the norm. And I remember one instant was that I had to come down. I had to come down and say hello to everyone and like be like nicely introduce myself to all like the uncles and aunties, like so we call like random people, like my dad's friends and stuff, and I just was like, why? Like, I don't want to. And it was rude of me to do that. And it was just like something that I didn't understand why I had to do that, and they didn't understand why I had such an issue with that. And so it's just like this conflict of like social norms that they wouldn't understand and that we wouldn't understand. And I also remember
So what
growing
was
up.
the conflict? Like, I really want to know. So why do you think that you shouldn't do that?
So it wasn't necessarily that. Like, I would go say my hellos, and then I just didn't want to sit and talk to them. I just didn't understand why I had to. I didn't like them asking me about what I'm studying, what I like, what my school is. I just didn't like and I don't even know if it would be considered intrusiveness or niceness. I just didn't want to tell them. Like, I felt like that was my personal information that they didn't need to know, and I disliked that. And I think that okay, they were here, I said my hellos, and I should be allowed to sit in my room. But that was something that my parents didn't understand. They were like, why are you sitting in your room? Like, this is a social gathering. You should be having fun. You should talk to these people. And I'm like, how is this fun? I am not having fun at all. Like, I just didn't get that. Like, and I really didn't. And I feel like when I saw that, when I'd come to Pakistan and I'd see my cousins and I would see how close they were to their parents' friends or their, like, distant relatives, and I was just confused as to why they would want, like, I really didn't understand as to why they could relate to these adults. And I feel like it changed a little bit over time for me, that I did find certain people I enjoyed talking to and I became closer to my family. But initially, especially when I was younger, I just didn't understand why I had to be not friends, but why I had to be on such good terms with my parents' friends. They were my parents' friends. They weren't my friends. They weren't people that I wanted to be with at that time. So I think that was a huge conflict, because my parents always talked about all these aunties and uncles that they were so close with, that they loved and that they went to go see. And I'm like, the people significantly older than them. And it was just something that I think that was a norm for them. And they didn't understand why their kids didn't adapt to that norm. And my brothers were the same way. Like, I feel like there's no one of my parents' friends that were like, oh, we just want to really go see that uncle or that auntie. It's just didn't happen. Like, it didn't. And I think that was a huge gap between us, in which they didn't understand why we were like that and we didn't understand why they were like that.
Yeah, this is such a great example, because it kind of like, this is our topic, like it kind of like proves the point that we we Desis do value getting along. We do value that a lot. So that's why your parents were so fussy about that. they did want you to get along with their friends. All right, well, I think it was a great discussion, and I totally loved having this conversation, and I hope you guys had fun listening to it. What do you think, Shumoel?
Yeah, thank you for listening to Mindful Over Mindless, and we would love to hear suggestions from you guys on what topics you want to hear from us.
And please leave your opinion in the comments below. We would love to read that, and we would love to know your opinion, because obviously your opinion matters to us. And I just want to give a disclaimer that if we said anything controversial, we weren't trying to be offensive. We were just two people having a discussion.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we hope to bring more content and conversations to you.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.